So the NPS wrote on the website, "This is just a sleeping volcano."
No thanks.
And the warning from our Native American ancestors still applies. It could roar back to life at any moment.
This is the Exploring the National Parks podcast with Dirt in My Shoes. My name is Ash, and I'm a former park ranger and the founder of Dirt in My Shoes. I think that the parks are best seen from the trail, and I'm here to make national park trip planning easy.
And I'm John. I carry the kids on the trails, I tell stories, and notice all the things that Ash doesn't care about much, like trees.
Join us as we show you around America's spectacular national parks.
We're sharing our favorite places, fun facts, adventures, and misadventures.
And we'll even throw in a little trip planning.
Let's start exploring. So I have a running Google Doc that Ash just became aware of. And this Google Doc is titled Lost Jokes. Because
heaven help us. Makes it on the lost jokes pile.
There are a lot of things in there that I think out of context people would just think that it was like that Word document that Ryan from The Office set up for Creed. It's like Creed thoughts at Creed. Just out of context, and maybe even in context, people probably think, who is this guy? But anyways, there are a lot of jokes that I kind of write and prepare for some of these episodes that don't get used, and when they don't get used, they go on the Lost Jokes Google Doc.
johnthoughts.johnthoughts.com.
Exactly. I put one on there today, and it's not completely thought through yet. And Ash told me that I should just bring it up. So I told her that I have this folder and she wanted me to use one. So I'm just going to tell everybody a John thought that I have on my Lost Jokes. I have a problem with birds, and I didn't realize it until today. Because where we live, we recently came home from a trip, and it must have rained a lot or something, because there are a lot of dead worms all over our sidewalk and cement. I'm pretty sure that's a common problem all around the world, is worms.
I don't know. The frogs come out in Hawaii.
That's true. Do they dry up and die on your sidewalk, though?
I don't think so.
Okay, well,
it's a little different. You're right.
Okay, so this is my joke. Birds love to eat worms. Like, that's the one food that all people know that birds love to eat. But why in the world don't they eat worm jerky, basically?
Oh, gross.
Yeah, it's like Exodus. It's like manna from heaven, you know? The birds will eat fresh worms, but when God cooks them and dries them up for them and prepares worm jerky, they won't even touch it.
Worm jerky? That's so gross.
And so we just end up having worm jerky all over our sidewalks, and nobody ever goes. No one goes out there with a shovel and chips them off.
Oh, gross.
And so, anyways, I just think it's rather rude and ungrateful of birds to not eat the dried out worm manna.
Gosh, that was better than I thought it would be. I love John Thoughts.
Anyways,
this whole episode is going to be John Thoughts because it's a fun facts episode, which is when he takes the wheel and leads us on a journey through a park, which usually it's pretty good. Actually, you know what? The fun facts are like my favorite episodes, and I think they're most people's favorite. So
nice.
Thanks for your John Thoughts. We want John Thoughts today on Crater Lake National Park.
Oh, yeah. No birds. Nothing to do with birds.
No worm jerky.
There is literally no segue from the bird joke into Crater Lake.
Just John Thoughts on Crater Lake. That's what our fun facts episode is going to be today. I'm really excited for this because I feel like a lot of people don't know much about Crater Lake. I know I didn't.
Yeah.
And I probably still don't. I think you're still going to surprise me today with some stuff.
Oh, man. Let me tell you something. I am so excited to talk about this park because there is so much going on that people don't realize. But not just because we get to talk about the fun facts is why I'm excited to talk about this. I'm also excited about it because we get to talk about one of my favorite books.
Okay.
Aragon.
I have not read that one.
You should read it
I
because
think I'd like it.
you like dragon rider stories.
Yes.
If you haven't heard of Aragon before, it's the first book in the Inheritance Cycle series of books. And I absolutely love them. I got into them when I was a teenager. They're amazing. But they've got all the best things. Men, elves, dwarves, dragons, and Ash's favorite, dragon riders. Plus a bunch of other cool stuff. But while we're on the topic of this series, and just in case my dad is listening, I want all the internet to know that, Dad, I'm still not over that time that you spoiled the ending of the second book for me back in 2005. We bought one book for the whole family to share, and we were all just sort of like taking turns reading a few different chapters. And it was all great until my dad was like, can you believe that something happened and somebody really important showed up and did something really unexpected? And I was like, Dad, none of that has happened for me yet.
And John hasn't read a book since.
Yeah, that's partially true. But then my dad was like, oh, well, this tapioca pudding's really good. Would you like some? And I was like, no, Dad, I'm just going to hold on to this for 20 years and tell everybody in the world in a podcast. And then he was like, what's a podcast? And I was like, I don't know, but you'll find out. So anyways, I've been holding on to that for a while. The early 2000s were crazy in terms of spoilers, I think.
Yeah.
I think we've gotten a little bit better. Our culture has adapted to how fast things move and how fast information can travel. And so I feel like we're a little bit more conscientious in terms of spoilers.
I think I just stay off the internet if I know someone's going to try to spoil something for me. It's like, I haven't read that book yet. I'm not getting on there.
I know. It's so true.
Or I haven't seen that movie yet. I'm not going to even look at anything.
Yes. But I do have a reason for bringing up Aragon. And the reason is because one of my favorite places within that series of books almost perfectly resembles Crater Lake National Park. There are a few spoilers here, so fast forward like 30 seconds or so if you don't want any spoilers.
I thought you were so mad about spoilers. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm giving people a warning.
It's true.
The pressure is off of me. Maybe a little bit more than 30 seconds. So anyways, Aragon is a dragon rider and is being hunted by the only other known living dragon rider, the evil king Galbatorix. Aragon's only hope is to reach a small but powerful resistance force hidden deep within the Bior Mountains. After a long journey, Aragon and his dragon, Saphira, actually do find this resistance force, and they even agree to take him and the dragon to their stronghold. But they take him into a hidden tunnel at the base of one of the giant Bior Mountains, and the tunnel just keeps going and going and going. Eventually, the tunnel opens up, and Aragon looks out and gasps. The tunnel didn't just take them to a stronghold within the mountain. It didn't even take them to the far side of the mountain. The tunnel took them to the heart of the mountain. And only then did he realize that this was no ordinary mountain. It was Farthen Dur, an ancient volcano with an empty crater for its center. The crater was circular and easily 10 miles across, with vertical walls that extended 12 miles or more into the sky. It was a landscape that he never would have believed actually existed. Massive icicles hung from the ancient crater walls high above them, higher than any dragon could ever fly, and the crater opening at the top of the mountain, miles above them, let just enough light in to illuminate their true destination. The ancient dwarvish city of Trondheim. Built out of a shimmering marble, the city appeared, at least from afar, like a white mountain standing alone in the middle of the massive volcanic crater.
Cool. But no lake.
No lake. But does that not sound
It does, yeah.
like Crater Lake National Park? Oh my gosh, an ancient volcano with an empty crater and kind of like an island mountain in the middle?
Yeah.
Sounds just like...
It does. It just needs some really, really blue water.
Yes.
And then it would be Crater Lake.
It does. And I'm telling you, there is a greater than 0% chance of finding dwarves in Crater Lake National Park.
John has looked.
It's greater than 0. It's got to be. Okay, but even if we never find them, this national park is the perfect mixture of facts, science, legend, and fantasy. Like, the story of this park is so cool that even the National Park Service wants to get in on the storytelling. There are multiple pages on the Crater Lake National Park site where the rangers can't help write things that would just be like the perfect tagline for a Hollywood thriller or something. You have to say it in the right voice, of course. But one of them is like, deep water in a sleeping volcano. Or, first there was a mountain, now there is a lake. And it's like, both of them, I'm just like, ooh, story time. Everybody quiet around the campfire. Ash, stop talking about trip planning. We're going to learn about a story, like what happens if the volcano wakes up? What happens to the water? Or why was there a mountain and why is there now a lake? Those aren't even made out of the same thing. It's like saying there was a rock and now there's a soda. But I'll tell you, the transition is epic. And like I said before, it's the perfect mixture of fact, fiction, science, and legend. And we may never know the whole story, but what we do know often sounds too cool to be true. Which brings me to Brandon Sanderson, if you know him at all. He has a guideline that he writes his books by. And one of the guidelines that he uses is always err on the side of what's awesome.
Oh, that's a good motto for life.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
Always err on the side of what's awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you, Brandon Sanderson.
That's great.
And in the spirit of Brandon Sanderson, we're going to dive right into a pretty rapid fire fun fact number 1 and number 2. But first, we need one thing: the name of the mountain in Crater Lake National Park. The mountain is called Mount Mazama. And fun fact number 1 is that Mount Mazama, which Crater Lake resides within, is responsible for the largest explosive eruption in the Cascades going back 1 million years. And one of the largest eruptions on Earth for at least the past 12,000 years.
Nice. And there's a lot of volcanoes in the Cascades. So we're not talking like there's just like, here's this volcano that erupted really big. It's like, here's this volcano that erupted bigger than 10 other volcanoes. So
exactly.
It's a pretty big deal.
Biggest in this group of volcanoes, but also the biggest over the last 12,000 years. Basically, probably the biggest. It's kind of like that Luke Bryan song, if you're not a 10, you're a 9.9, which Ash always hated that line.
I'm like, I'm a 10.
Don't say I'm a 9. That's, Ash always found that line offensive whenever I sing it to her. So it's one of the largest eruptions on Earth for 12,000 years, which basically means it's the largest, to drive that point home, it's the largest eruption in recorded human history. Mm-hmm. And so as long as we've been writing down our history or had oral histories that have successfully been passed down to us now, this event, this eruption at Mount Mazama at Crater Lake National Park is the largest that we know of. It
would have been crazy to have been in that area at
that
time.
Gosh.
Because when you go to Crater Lake and you're looking at the lake and it's in the middle of a crater of a mountain, and it's like, this mountain was huge.
Yeah.
It was huge, and it basically blew its whole top.
Yep.
To make room for this giant crater that the lake now sits in. Oh. It's really hard to put your mind around it, but really cool. I think it makes the lake so much cooler to be like, this lake is literally in the middle of a volcano.
When I think about that, this mountain, this volcano, and then we named it after a lake, the national park after a lake. I feel like Gimli, when in the Fellowship in the first movie, he's like, and they call it a mine, a mine, it's like, and they named the national park after a lake.
Yeah. Instead of the giant mountain.
Exactly. It's just crazy because this is where the Earth's raw power was truly revealed.
But that's what people don't recognize.
Right.
And it's like, yes, the lake is so impressive. It really is. Mm-hmm. But I would venture to say that most people who visit Crater Lake don't even realize that they're looking at a lake inside of a volcano.
Right. Exactly.
I don't think most people even understand that or know that or do the research beforehand.
Right.
To understand what they're actually looking at. It's like, this is just like a really, really pretty lake.
Right.
And a really deep lake.
Oh, I know.
But it's in a volcano.
So this is the goal. This is one of the main goals of today's episode, is to help people appreciate where the lake sits, what it's sitting within. So back to the rapid fire of the 2 fun facts. The eruption, which we're going to talk about with fun fact number 2, this is going to be our human history fact. Instead of saving it for fun fact number 5, fun fact number 2 is our human history fact.
Okay.
Fun fact number 2 is that this event was so powerful that not only did it have a lasting effect on the landscape, but it also reverberated through time and left such a mark on the native people that lived here, so that thousands of years later, generations and generations after the eruption took place, the native people believed this place to be too sacred to approach or even really talk about openly. They inherited so much awe and respect, and I would imagine fear and trauma because of what happened, that many wouldn't even look at the mountain.
Oh my gosh.
Thousands of years after the eruption, Native Americans believed that this mountain, the place with this national park, was so sacred that looking upon it would lead to death, which is why settlers and prospectors literally stumbled onto this lake by accident. And so they didn't hear.
That's crazy. Nobody talked about it, and then all of a sudden they saw it.
I know. It's crazy. And even today, some Native Americans have so much reverence for this place that they choose not to view Crater Lake. I've heard humility described as like being deeply aware of your actual situation in the world or like in the universe. And I can't think of anything more humbling than what those Native Americans would have experienced.
And what a cool thing to know that. And then when you do visit this national park, to internalize that a little bit, because isn't that what's so cool about the national parks is when you're there, you feel small. You feel like a speck. You feel like just, life goes on and the world keeps moving and and, Mother Nature or the creator or God or whoever you believe in, that's the power. You are nothing. I love that feeling. And I think that it's cool to add in that cultural aspect of it too. I didn't know that. I didn't know that some Native Americans won't even look at it because it's so sacred. And that just to me brings a depth to my experience.
Right.
Looking at it and recognizing that to some people, this place is everything.
Right. Exactly. It's crazy. I mean, Mount St. Helens gives us modern people kind of an image of what the power and violence that these people would have experienced would be like, but it's really only like a taste of the fury that can really be unleashed by these mountains. I totally understand from like a religious context, honoring the mystery and beauty and the danger of this place with a somewhat sacred determination and a determination to give this mountain its space.
Right.
Especially if your ancestors were there and they sent you a message through time that they were there and something happened that they couldn't really explain, but it was terrible and crazy and powers beyond explanation revealed themselves. It's just great. But we have that message. We even have it now. And we're going to get to that story in a little bit.
Okay.
But I think to honor the story, we're going to have to earn it a little bit. So we'll talk about a few things before we get there.
Okay. That's really cool, though.
It is super cool. And so for the first thing that we need to recognize is that Mount Mazama, the mountain that Crater Lake resides within, does not exist in isolation. This is not the lonely mountain from The Hobbit, right? Mount Mazama is a part of a chain of volcanic mountains called the Cascades. And babe, I love the Tetons and I love you and I love the Rocky Mountains, but I think to my core, I can't help it. I think the Cascades are probably my favorite mountains.
I think that's true. You should see John when we're driving through. It's Northern California, Oregon, Washington, up into there. I mean, it includes, I remember the first time we saw Mount Shasta.
Yeah.
And John was just like, what is that?
What is that ahead of us?
I need to get closer to that mountain. Like, I've never seen you so excited.
I know.
About seeing mountains. And when you're hiking in Mount Rainier on the Skyline Trail, there's literally a part that has a viewpoint with like 3 different volcanoes you can see while you're standing on a volcano.
I know.
It is pretty cool. I don't blame you. I don't blame you one bit because I didn't realize that area was so cool. That bumped like all the parks in the Cascades. Like they like went way higher on my list of favorites.
Yeah. I know.
Once I realized what I was looking at and like just how much volcanic activity is there and these just giant mountains. They're so cool.
They are so
cool.
But
I think I forget, though, that Mount Mazama and Crater Lake is a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I just forget because it's not as, the mountain is blown apart. It's not like Mount Rainier where it dominates the skyline and stuff. You don't think of it in the same way.
Right. And so let's hold on to that for a second, put a pin in it, because it is part of this chain of incredibly tall mountains that stand out in the skyline high above everything else. But it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't do that. So we'll come back to that. We'll put a pin in it. What we need to ask for a moment is why there is a big chain of volcanoes stretching from California through Oregon and heading up through Washington and Canada. The answer, as often is the case, is plate tectonics.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a smallish tectonic plate called the Juan de Fuca plate that has been sliding underneath North America just off the coast of the Pacific Northwest for millions of years. Now, the journey that the Juan de Fuca plate takes as it slides underneath North America is why these volcanoes are here. And it isn't easy. North America isn't just resting its head on top of the Juan de Fuca plate like a soft pillow. The Juan de Fuca plate is being forced down under North America into the Earth's mantle. That's what geologists call subduction. And as it's being forced underneath North America, parts of it melt due to the extreme heat. And the parts of the tectonic plate that melt start to rise because it's super hot and heat rises. And after a long time, with constant heat and constant melting from that subducting tectonic plate, the magma finally reaches the surface, and that is when you get a volcano. Well, that's what's been happening throughout the Pacific Northwest for thousands of years, and that's why there is a chain of volcanoes all throughout this area. They all formed as a result of these tectonic forces. But what I think is cool about the Cascades, and why they make my imagination just go so crazy, is because every one of them looks like a monster. Except they all look like what I would expect the Lonely Mountain to look like.
Well, they are. I mean, that's what's crazy. I know I keep going back to Mount Rainier on this, but I feel like that's like the nearest national park. I mean, Lassen has a volcano, but it's not as big as and dominating as Rainier.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that's what's crazy is there's just a giant volcano and it's surrounded by other mountains, but you almost don't even notice.
Right.
Because it's so dominating.
Oh, yeah. It's like seeing the Empire State Building surrounded by houses is what it looks like a lot of times.
Yeah, and it's like you would notice those mountains, those shorter mountains anywhere else.
Right.
But here you don't even think like you're like, I've looked at some of my pictures and I'm like, oh, those are actually really pretty mountains. But like you never look at them. You're looking at Mount Rainier. And so, yeah, the whole area is just cool how they're just so big.
Yeah. Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, Mount Hood, Mount Adams, Mount St. Helens, Mount Shasta. You mentioned Lassen Peak. They all have that look of a massive mountain standing tall and alone in a wilderness, all except for Mount Mazama. Now, the USGS spends a lot of time and resources studying these volcanoes. Not because they're cool and they're really fun to think about, but
because they're super dangerous.
Yeah, because these are the most dangerous volcanoes in the lower 48.
Yeah.
And they've all got millions of people living around them. And so the USGS spends a lot of time and energy looking after these guys and digging into their history so that hopefully we can learn enough to protect the millions of people that will be in danger when one of these volcanoes erupts.
Yeah.
And it's a little scary that we use the word when instead of if.
Oh, it's all when.
Yes. Because the USGS has gone back like thousands of years and charted and tracked all of the eruptions of these volcanoes, and many of them have patterns. Some don't really seem to have patterns, which is scary, but even the ones that erupt the most often, like Mount St. Helens, can be unpredictable. And so they're all scary. But what's truly amazing is the average. The average eruption rate of the Cascades, not even the average eruption per like million years or even 1,000 years, because those are crazy. What I think is nuts is the average eruption rate in the Cascades for every century. Over the past 4,000 years in the Cascades, there has been an average of 2 eruptions per century.
Oh my gosh.
Which is why we use when instead of if.
Wait, so going back to the 20th century, you had Mount St. Helens and Lassen Peak.
Right.
Both erupted in the 1900s.
Yes. Which to me just means there's a lot of time to get too comfortable between eruptions.
Enough time to remember, but mostly forget. It's like childbirth.
Exactly.
It's like you remember the bad, but it starts to get dulled over time.
Exactly. As your kid gets older and cuter.
Yeah. When they start sleeping through the night, you're like, this isn't so bad.
Bust out another one of these. But not to be a scaremonger or anything, but if the average is 2 a century, we're coming up on 50 years since Mount St. Helens erupted.
Yeah.
So I don't give financial advice on this podcast, but I do generally believe in math and the law of averages. Might be worth checking your insurance.
Yeah. What's the insurance going to do?
I don't know.
It's definitely something you're right. Like a lot of these volcanoes are in very populous areas. Mazama's not.
No.
Crater Lake is not. That was really surprising, actually, the first time we went. I was like, nobody lives here. There's nothing around here.
Right.
It's very quiet.
Which, honestly, might be able to be traced back to the Native Americans, like, treating this area so sacred.
Yeah. It could be because it really is in an area that's mostly pretty heavily populated.
Exactly.
Then you get to Crater Lake and you're like, why can't I get gas?
Exactly.
Which we talked about in the exploring episode. We had to drive so far to get diesel for our truck.
I know.
Yeah, it is.
It does feel like you just stumble upon this mountain,
You
though.
do. And as you mentioned, that's basically what happened for the prospectors and, the people that stumbled upon Crater Lake.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy.
It is nuts. So let's bring it back to the fact that Mount Mazama is the exception in this chain of incredible mountain volcanoes, because you do stumble on it, and that doesn't happen with other Cascade mountains. You see them from far off, and you know when you arrive. So what's going on here? What's different about Mount Mazama? The answer is going to come to us in the form of that message from our Native American ancestors from 7,700 years ago. The message sent to us from the Native American ancestors comes from the Klamath Indians, who are the modern descendants of the Micmac people who lived southeast of present-day Crater Lake National Park. The Umpqua people, they also have a similar story, but I think we kind of have enough backstory now to really appreciate this message that they're sending through time. The spirit of the mountain was called Chief of the Below World, or Lao. The spirit of the sky was called Chief of the Above World, Skell. So you had Lao and Skell. Sometimes Lao came up from his home inside the earth and stood on top of Mount Mazama, one of the highest mountains in the region. During one of these visits, he saw the Micmac chief's beautiful daughter and fell in love with her. He promised her eternal life if she would return with him to his lodge below the mountain. When she refused, he became angry and declared that he would destroy her people with fire. And in his rage, he rushed up through the opening of his mountain and stood on top of it and began to hurl fire down upon them. The mighty Skell took pity on the people and stood atop Mount Shasta to defend them. From their mountaintops, the two chiefs waged a furious battle. They hurled red-hot rocks as large as hills. They made the earth tremble and caused great landslides of fire. The people fled in terror to the waters of Klamath Lake. Two holy men offered to sacrifice themselves by jumping into the pit of fire on top of Lao's mountain. Skell was moved by their bravery and drove Lao back into Mount Mazama. When the sun rose next, the great mountain was gone. It had fallen in on Lao.
Cool.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Isn't that like an amazing message from the past? We have this story, and we have this amazing legend of, Lao falling in love with this Native American girl and everything like that. But the idea of red hot rocks being hurled from the mountain as large as hills and driving the Native American people to the only safe place they could find, Klamath Lake. That's intense.
Yeah.
So we have this story, but we still don't know exactly why the mountain disappeared, right? And also, did Mount Shasta really blow it up?
Well, that's what I was wondering. Did Mount Shasta erupt too around the same time? Do we know that?
Okay, so the science is almost more wild than the story, which is kind of cool. And this will bring us into fun fact number 3, and it will kind of wrap it all up for us. Originally, Mount Mazama was 12,000 feet tall. Today, the highest point along the rim of the crater is just over 8,000 feet in elevation, which means that from far off, the reason you can't see Mount Mazama anymore is because the skyline literally lost 4,000 feet of elevation. But that's not the full story, because below the rim, there is a massive deep crater that you also have to take into account, which fun fact number 3 adds into the equation. From the top of the rim to the bottom of the crater, you drop almost another 4,000 feet. So fun fact number 3 is that in that eruption 7,700 years ago, in real elevation loss, from the top of Mount Mazama to the bottom of the crater, Mount Mazama lost approximately 8,000 feet in elevation because it spewed out 12 cubic miles of volcanic material and magma from underneath it.
That's so terrifying.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
8,000 feet. No wonder the legend talks about red hot rocks as big as hills, because 12 cubic miles of magma and lava burst out of this mountain and spewed all across the landscape. You can find ash from Mount Mazama over 1,000 miles away.
Oh my gosh.
And scientists estimate that it erupted 30 miles into the sky, is how high this ash went.
Wow.
Oh.
I know. There are no words.
There are no words. Okay, now, scientifically, as the geologists look at things, they can't necessarily corroborate the legend with Mount Shasta erupting at the same time. So we don't have the battle between Mount Shasta and Mount Mazama scientifically proven.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine it happening, and I can also imagine enough ash and lava in the sky to make it appear like there's
it's coming all the way from Mount Shasta.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can imagine all of that happening.
Yeah.
But holy smokes, the native people, I can totally understand being like, we have to pass this message down. We can no longer have our people surrounding this mountain.
Yeah.
We got to give this place its distance.
Yeah.
And
that was so traumatic. Let's not talk about it again.
Oh my gosh. Seriously.
Just like witnessing that much power, I think would change you. There'd be no way that you wouldn't be a changed person after that.
Well, and they've found Native American artifacts and remains and things under a lot of the ash. And so we know this wasn't just a cool thing off in the distance.
Right.
This was a traumatic event for a lot of people. Oof. Weird transition. Have you ever sat on a whoopee cushion?
Yes.
We have 2 boys that are very young. We definitely have sat.
I'm going to say that there's been some whoopee cushions put under my chair a few times by my kids.
Exactly.
As encouraged from their dad.
Yes, I may or may not have blown up said whoopee cushion. Okay. All right. So the reason I bring up the whoopee cushion is because I think we can understand why the mountain lost the top 4,000 feet of elevation.
Right. Because if you watch Mount St. Helens erupt, you can see it just blows the whole side of the volcano open.
Exactly.
So you can see, you can look that up now to see kind of what that looks like.
Yes, exactly.
To blow its top.
Yes. And you definitely should. So I would definitely recommend looking it up on YouTube or something to kind of see the raw power of an actual volcano exploding in this chain of mountains. Okay. So, but the reason I bring it up, so you can understand it, blowing its top, all the ash, all the dirt, everything goes everywhere. You can understand that. But the bottom 4,000 feet of elevation that created the crater, what happened there? Okay, so what you have to think of is the top 4,000 feet of elevation on Mount Mazama didn't actually blow up like you would expect, and just that 4,000 feet is now spread all over Oregon. what actually happened, according to like my understanding of the NPS, their different illustrations of how things happened, it kind of happened like a whoopee cushion. This 12 cubic miles of magma underneath the mountain, it opened up shafts in the mountain and started spewing stuff out, spewing this 12 miles of cubic magma out of these shafts. And as that magma chamber emptied,
it started to collapse on itself.
Exactly. The mountain collapsed inwards, filling in that space, kind of like a person sitting on a whoopee cushion. And so you fill in the space that
used to be full of air.
Exactly.
Nice.
So that the mountain literally fell into itself, into this empty magma chamber. It's kind of crazy to think about it that way. But the mountain didn't explode. It kind of imploded into itself. And so it's kind
while also exploding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know, it's really kind of crazy to think about what happened.
No, I mean, it makes sense, though, because you have all of these chambers underneath the mountain that are holding magma. So when those start emptying, it's like there's nothing there to hold up all the weight of the mountain on top anymore.
Exactly. Leaving behind what we see today, a giant stump of a mountain with a massive empty crater inside. And so, but it's not so empty anymore, which is what we'll talk about when we get to fun fact number 4 and 5. But before we move on to that, I don't want to give anybody the idea that Mount Mazama's story is over. Because Mount Mazama is not considered an extinct volcano. In fact, today, it is still ranked 17th out of the top 160 potentially most dangerous volcanoes in the country.
Really? And it says Mount Mazama?
It says Mount Mazama. Or maybe it says Crater. I don't know exactly.
But
I had the list.
Yeah.
But yes, so the NPS wrote on the website, this is just a sleeping volcano.
No thanks.
And the warning from our Native American ancestors still applies. It could roar back to life at any moment.
That's part of the excitement of visiting these national parks in the Cascades. Everything is any moment.
Exactly.
Any moment now, this might happen. And as you're standing on it, you're thinking, hopefully it's not this moment. I would like to see it and enjoy my trip and then leave before anything happens.
Exactly. Because that tectonic plate, the Juan de Fuca plate, is still subducting. It's still going down underneath North America, creating more magma that is rising up these channels of magma and possibly refilling that magma chamber.
Yeah.
And Mount Mazama is just one of these mountains in the Cascades that could erupt over these, if in the average of 2 per century. And so
that really is a terrifying average.
I know, it's awesome. And they named it after a lake. A lake. Oh my gosh.
Mazama National Park.
I know.
But I mean, we already mentioned this, but it's crazy to me that when you think about Crater Lake, you really are like, we want to see the bluest, deepest lake in America. And not even realizing that you're standing on the rim of a volcano.
I know.
It's really not emphasized a whole lot in a lot of places. So I like that you spent so much time talking about the other, because now when you get there, you'll be like, yeah, the lake is super cool.
It is super
It's
cool.
really pretty, but holy smokes, like it's in the middle of a volcano.
And you might walk a little bit more tentatively, like eggshell walking a little bit as you're on this volcano.
Gonna help, yeah.
I know.
But you'll notice more volcanic evidence
Features.
too as you're walking around. Like it will help you think about this park in a totally different way with that foundation of knowledge. Because then as you go to other places, you'll be like, that's volcanic. Interesting.
Yep.
Where otherwise you might have just walked right past.
Yes. So let's review just for a second before we move on from the mountain. Fun fact number 1. This is the largest eruption in human history, basically. An eruption so powerful that the Native American people for thousands of years have been giving this mountain its distance because they can now consider it sacred. And the eruption was so large that it literally spewed 12 cubic miles of magma over the landscape and lost 8,000 feet of elevation because the eruption was so big.
Cool.
It just blew its top.
Yeah. So cool.
So that's Mount Mazama. Woo! I loved it. Okay, but the namesake of this park and what people come to see, it's absolutely stunning. Crater Lake.
Yeah, we got to talk about the lake here. So,
yes, we absolutely need to talk about the lake. And as we talked about during the Exploring Crater Lake episode, there really is no greater grand reveal, and it's because of the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And so the moment you see it, I mean, you'll never be the same, in my opinion. It's too stunning.
Yeah, it's hard to put into words how just absolutely spectacular it is.
Yes.
When you see it for the first time.
And it is no ordinary lake. I mean, it is possibly the most beautiful lake I've ever seen. Which brings me to my naming theory, which comes to us courtesy of Seinfeld. One of my favorite all-time episodes of Seinfeld is the Muffin Tops episode. Elaine has this great idea about a muffin shop where all you get is the muffin top. Because that is the part of the muffin that everybody wants anyways.
You can buy muffin tops, by the way. That's a trend that happened.
Yep, exactly.
Anyway, she was onto something.
She was. Nobody wants the stump. Blah. All you really want is the top. It's easily the most delicious part of the muffin. Well, people love that you can buy just the muffin top, but Elaine can't seem to get rid of the muffin stumps. Nobody, not even the dump, will take them because they're so offended that they don't get the muffin tops. And so the whole episode is hilarious. But I'm pretty sure that's what happened here. The lake is the muffin top and Mount Mazama is the stump of a mountain.
Yeah.
Right? And so, which otherwise it would be probably like Mount Mazama National Park. And you can't help but love the muffin top, which is Crater Lake. It's so pretty. And so let's jump into Crater Lake. It's the best part of the muffin. It's a blue lake. It's a sacred lake, a lake with true majesty. And we'll jump into fun fact number 4. Fun fact number 4 is that Crater Lake, at a depth of 1,943 feet, is the deepest lake in the United States of America, beating its closest competitor by almost 300 feet.
Nice.
So it is supremely deep in the United States.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Well, I mean, it's in a crater. That's so cool.
Yeah. And what I think is really cool about Crater Lake versus all of its competitors in the top 5 in the US is that Crater Lake is the only one not significantly carved out by glaciers.
Glaciers. Yeah, I was going to say pretty much everything else would have been glaciers.
Exactly.
And that's why it's so cool it's in a crater, because it's like after you talked about how much elevation Mount Mazama lost after its eruption.
Right.
And then the water filled it in.
Right.
Which is why it's so deep. That's what's so crazy about it, is it's like there was just this giant hole in this mountain and the water filled it in.
Yeah. Crater Lake got all of its depth from the major eruption and then the subsequent collapse 7,700 years ago.
Yeah.
And so the top 5, you got Crater Lake at 1943. You have Lake Tahoe, Lake Chelan, Lake Superior, Lake Pend Oreille. All those other ones carved out by glaciers. Absolutely beautiful.
Wait, Lake Tahoe?
Yeah.
Is second?
It's second. Yep. 1,645 feet.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Side note.
Yes.
That surprised me.
I know, but it's really deep and it's really pretty. But this is the only one that came via volcanic activity like this. And
Which
so
is why it's so deep.
I know. And Mount Mazama has even tried to level the playing field with these other lakes by filling it in with smallish eruptions and things like that. But even still, like I don't even know 7,700 years ago how deep it actually got to.
Right.
Because it has sort of been filling it in, which is why we have things like Wizard Island, or if you bring it
like the cone
exactly
of another eruption, probably.
Yes. It looks like a little tiny mountain inside of it, just like Trondheim from Aragon.
Yeah.
And so it's super neat. So suck on that, every other lake in the USA. Crater Lake's even trying to help you and you still can't compete. Okay, but the depth of this lake isn't really what strikes people when they see it, because you can't see how deep the lake is.
No.
What strikes people when they see the lake is its color.
Yeah.
Now, editing pictures of this lake is really difficult, and that's kind of one of my jobs at Dirt in My Shoes, is editing some of our pictures and making sure they look nice. When I have to take care of pictures from Crater Lake, I actually have to tone down the blue from Crater Lake because it doesn't look real.
Yeah.
You know when you see like a highly edited picture and you're just like, ugh, gross. You're just like, or when you're scrolling on Facebook or something or Instagram and you're like, oh, come on, that's not real.
Especially if you've been there. It's like, nah, that's not correct.
Exactly. The blue of this lake is like that.
Yeah.
You look at this lake and you're like, nah, that guy is just editing the saturation of that up a little bit, making it look prettier than it is. But it isn't. I actually have to tone it down. It's such a pure and crisp color of blue that you almost don't believe your eyes. It often is more blue than the sky because the sky has clouds and it gets hazy. But the lake stays tremendously blue year round. But the question is why? Why is this lake so blue? Is it something volcanic? Is it because it's in a volcano? Is it the depth? Is it something in the water that's kind of cleaning it? What is it? Do you have an answer, Ash? Do you know? Do you have any theories?
I'm trying to remember, but it's got to have something to do with how the water doesn't leave.
No.
No? Darn it. How the water is all rainwater?
That is a very good point right there. So we'll think about that for just a we'll put a pin in it.
You keep putting pins in all my thoughts.
I know. Well, it's kind of you help me foreshadow things, which is nice. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Okay. Now there's before we answer your question or my question that I asked to you.
I feel like this was in a Junior Ranger book. That's why I'm embarrassed.
It was.
I'm like, I am sure this is like a very basic thing that you should know.
Yes.
If you've been to Crater Lake. But no, my brain is foggy. I don't remember.
Okay. Well, there's actually, so to help people recognize or to understand the water that is in Crater Lake, there's actually a test that a lot of hydrologists do to test bodies of water. And it's called a Secchi disc test. What a Secchi disc is it's like just a flat, round, 8-inch disc, basically, that is half black, half white. And you lower it into the water, and the further down it goes, you just basically measure how far down it goes before it disappears.
Okay.
And so it's really simple. Like this water I can see it 15 feet down before it disappears. So that's the goal. You're testing the clarity of the water. And scientists do this all over the world to test the transparency, the clarity, the turbidity of different water. So most bodies of water, big ones like the ocean, top out at like 30 feet or so. Lakes like us, like that we have here in Utah, you get a few feet. A lot of rivers like the Mississippi, you might only get like a few inches, because it's really muddy and things like that. But it's a very effective way of measuring the water clarity. Crater Lake is incredible at this test. Oh my gosh.
I'm so excited. How far did it make it?
It blows everything out of the water. The record at Crater Lake for a Secchi disc depth test was 143 feet.
Oh my God.
And most big bodies of water are like 30 tops. They top out at like 30 feet. And so you can get 5 times further than that, basically, at Crater Lake.
Is that, so I know there's lots of things that probably go into that, but is it cleanliness related mostly, like just how clean the actual water is?
Yes. A huge part of that is where the water comes from and the purity of the water.
Okay.
This is where I'm a little frustrated with the world because Crater Lake doesn't have the world record for a Secchi disc test. There's a place like in Antarctica, there's a sea down there that has a deeper reading than Crater Lake. But they used a larger Secchi disc.
Oh.
And so it doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't count.
That doesn't count. And so it's like the one they used in Crater Lake is like 8 inches.
Yeah.
The one they used in this other test was like a foot across. And so I'm like, come on, it's a third larger. Give me a break. Okay, if we're going to do apples to apples testing, let's do apples to apples testing.
For sure. I'm with you on that.
Okay.
So Crater Lake wins.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. It was kind of funny. I tried to have AI do the math for me to figure out how small an object would appear that was 8 inches this close to my face and 143 feet away from me. You know, how small it would look. I tried to have AI give me the math on how small it would appear, but all I got was the object would appear very small. And I was like,
you're like, but like the size of a button or
I know.
a penny or what?
Exactly.
What are we looking at 140
and I was like,
feet down?
It was like, and I like pushed it a little further, like, right, but how small is it? It was like, it's 8 inches. I'm like, right, I know it's 8 inches, but how small does it appear? It appears very small, but it's 8 inches. And I was like, okay, I would answer questions like this in high school. Like if I didn't know the answer to a story problem, I'd be like, it's actually 8 inches, but it appears, you know, like, I would get marked down for this, AI. Come on, give me a break. So I couldn't tell you how small it appeared. But like,
that's really cool, though.
I get the feeling that
that clear.
Yeah, and I get the feeling it didn't disappear because the water clarity, I think it just is too small for people's eyes to perceive at that distance.
Yeah, maybe.
So let's talk about why the water is so clear and why it's so pure. Because almost all of the water in Crater Lake comes from rain and snow that falls directly onto the surface of the lake.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew it was like rain and snow, but it's true that it falls directly on it. It doesn't gather sediments or anything.
Exactly. And even the remaining small percentage of water that doesn't come from snow or rain directly falling into the lake comes from whatever falls into the crater.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really have time to gather into streams and creeks and build up sediment. It just falls on the wall of the crater and seeps into the lake.
Interesting.
And so that's the only source of water for Crater Lake. And so it is so pure and so clean because it's its own water source. Basically, the sky is the water source for Crater Lake. There are no rivers, no streams that feed into it, which means that's very little pollution, almost no sediments, no contaminants, nothing in it but pure water, which directly contributes to fun fact number 5 and why the lake is so blue. Probably thanks to millions of visitors like you and me asking park rangers, why is the water so blue? The Park Service put tons of effort into actually figuring it out. So you have all these national park scientists out there poking and prodding and measuring and hypothesizing with the water in the lake. And they came up with an answer that you or I never ever would have come up with. What I didn't know is it has to do with a prism effect. Because we've seen rainbows and stuff like that, and a rainbow is just an effect caused by a prism. As light goes through water, the water splits the light into all of its different wavelengths, and then you see the different colors. And so you can do that with light from the sun. Well, what I didn't know is that water in its purest form, literally broken down to its molecular components of H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, water in this form has an amazing chemical property. It will absorb all of the colors of the rainbow, every wavelength of light, except for blue. You can't really tell if you have like a small amount of water. If you have a cup of water, you're not going to be able to experience or even perceive this happening with pure H2O. You have to have tons of water in order for all of the light to be absorbed, all of the different wavelengths of light to be absorbed, and you have to have a large body of water that can just reflect blue at you. Where do you think we can find such a large body of water?
And such clean, pure H2O.
Exactly. Fun fact number 5 is that Crater Lake has 4.6 trillion gallons of almost perfectly pure water. And those molecules are in fact absorbing every color and every wavelength of light except for the blue, which is being reflected back at us, and that's what our eyes are perceiving. The most pure, majestic blue you've probably ever seen and ever had reflected right at your eyes.
Nice.
Science, baby. Isn't that cool?
It is cool. I mean, I feel like I'm still like, I don't get where all the other colors go. but that is cool.
Yeah, it's just some weird scientific property or chemical property of H2O that it absorbs green, orange, brown, all of those other wavelengths of light, except for blue. And so much of it is getting absorbed into the lake, and then that's all we're seeing. We're just seeing what H2O doesn't absorb, and that's blue.
It really is the bluest lake you'll ever see.
I know.
It's so impressive.
But I never would have figured that out. I would have just been like, it's just reflecting the sky really good.
That's just what color water is.
Exactly. Water is blue.
Yeah.
That's the color of it. But that is Crater Lake. It is the deepest lake in the United States of America, and it is the bluest lake you'll ever perceive, and in such massive amounts. So that's Crater Lake National Park, folks.
I know. It's so cool. And honestly, like, we kind of barely scratched the surface.
We really did.
On all the cool stuff you can find there and all the fun facts. But I like how you focused a lot on the mountain and a lot on the lake.
Right.
Because that really is like, you know, the meat and potatoes of this park. So
yes.
For your task today, though, this might seem kind of like a dumb question. But we want to know, what are you more excited to see? Are you more excited to see the volcano and the crater and what's left behind of Mount Mazama?
Right.
Or are you more excited to see the beautiful blue lake?
Right. The deepest lake in America.
I know. And it's like, you know what? What a silly question. Of course, we want to see the lake because it's Crater Lake. But in the comments on the Dirt in My Shoes Facebook or Instagram page, go over there and just chime in and let us know if you learned something new.
Yeah,
especially about the mountain, I would say. Like I said, that part is often overlooked.
Yeah. Do you feel more like Ghibli? They call it a lake. A lake! You know, or
nobody thinks it's just a lake.
Exactly. Or do you think Gimli wants to take a swim in the water?
Or are you just really excited to see both?
Right.
You can say that too. That's fine. So head over to the Dirt in My Shoes social channels. We'll have them linked in the show notes. And you can go let us know how excited you are to visit Crater Lake and what you're so excited to see.
Right. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please give the Exploring the National Parks podcast a 5-star review. We love hearing from you. It helps the podcast. And if you get a chance, go get some volcanic dirt in your shoes.